All right, we are going to be discussing Sugarless Chapter 2, and the name of this chapter is Sugar is Hiding in Plain Sight. And I'm excited. I'm going to bring to you three main things in this chapter. One, facts, really interesting facts that she pulls out. I'm going to pull out some really interesting facts and studies. Second, her opinion, and really show the difference between opinion and fact on a couple of things. And then three, some of my own life experiences and some other research and studies that I've done. So let's dig in. The big thing that she's going to talk about in this chapter is that cutting back on sugar is so difficult because it is everywhere. Okay. And so, but at the same time, our bodies absolutely need sugar. We need sugar to live, she states. And she talks about gluconeogenesis, which is the idea that even if we're not eating carbohydrates, sugar is a carbohydrate, but it's not exactly the same thing as a carbohydrate, right? So she's talking about even if we're not eating a lot of sugar or even carbohydrates, people that are eating like a keto diet or a carnivore diet, their body in the liver is still making glucose because our bodies need glucose to live. Her argument is, or her thesis is, we do not need added sugar to live. So that's really the ball she's going to try to drive home in this chapter. And so it's very interesting. She answers a couple of questions in this chapter. And one of the first questions she answers is, do I have to completely give up sugar, like all of it, cold turkey? And her answer to that is nope. In fact, she says that trying to do that is setting yourself up for failure and actually quite counterproductive. She does recommend that it is best to do it incrementally. And she also says that expecting to completely avoid it is just not reasonable or realistic. And I can tell you that this is one of the things that I have experienced myself. We've been going on about 60 days of trying to do a low or no sugar diet with Logan. I joined him for 30 days and now he's doing another 30 days under the consultation of a doctor. And it has been, I can say 100%, expecting to completely avoid it just is not reasonable or realistic. We are trying really hard, and it is something very difficult to avoid. It is in everything. She's going to talk about later how sugar has 250 names, 250 names of different things, different ways that sugar is in products. And so that's going to be one of the reasons that it is so difficult to avoid. The other thing she talks about is sugar being a carbohydrate. And so, because some people are so dependent on added sugar, when they start giving that up, then they start craving carbohydrates. And this one reminded me of little Larissa because we have, like I said, over the last 60 days, dramatically decreased the amount of sugar that even Larissa is getting, and she's the one that will crave carbohydrates because ultimately those carbohydrates break down by our bodies into sugars. And so it's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. And then in chapter 5, which will be exciting when we get there, she's going to talk about craving crushing foods. So if you're craving sugars, if you're craving carbohydrates, this is going to be a way to crush those cravings. She has a chart about carbs on page 44. So if you get the book, have the book, that's kind of fun to see if you crave carbs, what kind of carbs you crave, if they're sweet carbs or non-sweet carbs. And so it is very interesting. So we're going to talk more about addiction in the next chapter, which is where this is all heading. But I just wanted to bring out this point here that she says, when excessive amounts of sugar are absorbed in the body, the brain releases large amounts of the neurotransmitter dopamine. We've talked a lot about dopamine recently. Scrolling on Facebook releases that dopamine, right? So, in other words, sugar activates the brain's reward system, which is why sugar is so addicting. And she's going to make the parallel that sugar, regardless of its source, calories, even what we would consider some healthy sugars, honey, maple syrup, they're all going to release this dopamine in our brain. And that is why she's going to say it makes no difference. I'm going to have a little bit of issue with that when we get there, but that's what she says. She also talks about carbs, not just counting carbs, because she'll take a high carb fruit like a banana, 31 grams of carbs, and something that's low carb like pork rinds. And she says anyone who tells you that eating pork rinds over a banana is just wrong. That's her opinion, because you can't just count carbs. So that was very interesting. But one of the sugar additives that she talks a lot about is high fructose corn syrup. And that's really what I want to discuss today. High fructose corn syrup came out in the 1970s and started being heavily added to our food as a sugar substitute, like in 80, 86, somewhere in there. So my entire life, basically, our kids' entire lives, right? And here's something very interesting. Tune in now about high fructose corn syrup. Excessive amounts end up being stored in the liver, causing fatty liver disease. Here's a statistic. 1 in 10 children, 1 in 10 children are now being diagnosed with fatty liver disease. Fatty liver disease used to be something that only pretty much alcoholics got, but they have actually had to come up with an entirely new diagnosis called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease because of all this high fructose corn syrup that is being stored in our livers and causing this. It's pretty astounding when you think about it. So she talks about some studies about also if you're trying to lose weight, if you take the same amount, they took rats and they gave them the same amount of beverage sweetened with high fructose corn syrup and the exact same amount of sucralose. And they found that the rats that were drinking the one with high fructose corn syrup were obese. They had more weight than the rats with just sucralose. So that was interesting. So comment below. This is what I want to talk about today is high fructose corn syrup. Have you given up high fructose corn syrup in your diet? Do you plan to? Are you like, okay, I already knew this was bad and I plan to give that up? Or do you think it would be possible? Do you think that that would be something that you would want to tackle and you think, oh yeah, that would be pretty identifiable and a good to give up? And let us know in the comments below. If you have already given up high fructose corn syrup, how did you do it and how did you feel? I'm very interested to know. For me personally, I think this would be like number 2 on my list. From a lot of the research I've done, I'm really focusing on our artificial dyes in my family's food. The government's going to help me a little bit getting it out of the store, but I'm trying to get it out of what I buy. And so that's like yellow 5, red 40, blue 1, those things. That's what I'm really concentrating on. But I would say high fructose corn syrup would be a close second. So I would put myself in the category of I plan to, and I do believe it would be very feasible. And so then, so after that, she goes on to talk about honey and maple syrup. And she's going to make a assertion here that the primary reason why these alternative sugars are no better for you than actual sugar is because your brain doesn't know the difference. So again, she's going to be talking about that dopamine neurotransmitter that's going to release dopamine. But for me, I think about honey being biblical. God says that the Israelites are going to be in a land flowing with milk and honey. She even talks about how honey does have antifungal, antibacterial, antiviral properties. And so that right there puts it in a class on its own for me, you know. And then she also talks about how maple syrup has manganese and zinc. So let's say that I have made waffles or pancakes for my family for breakfast, and I have a choice between setting out high fructose corn syrup or maple syrup. I don't think I could say that maple syrup is no better for my family. That is not an opinion that I agree with. It has minerals and it's just different, right? It is different. And so I take objection to that idea that it is no better. She goes on to talk about monk fruit and stevia. And again, she's going to say the same thing. she's going to, at the end of her chapter, make the assertion that monk fruit and stevia and sugar alcohols are as to sugar as methadone is to heroin. Remember, she's coming at this from a addiction standpoint. So she's saying you can use these artificial sweeteners and these natural sweeteners to lower your sugar intake, to break your addiction, but you do not want to stay on them or use them forever because they are also not good for you. That is what she's saying. So she goes on to talk about that. And if you know anything about stevia, it is 150 to 200 times sweeter than sugar, so you can use a lot less. Stevia and monk fruit both have those. And from personal experience, stevia has a bit of an aftertaste that I do not like. So I prefer monk fruit much better. We have incorporated a lot of monk fruit over the past couple of months, like I said, trying to go sugar-free with all of us, but mostly for Logan. And one of the things that we found with monk fruit is that when we went to buy it, almost all of them on the shelf were combined with erythritol. Erythritol is a sugar alcohol that she also addresses in here. And the interesting thing about that one is erythritol, some of the studies are showing increased thrombosis and cardiac events related to erythritol. So if I were you, I would not get the two that are combined. I would stick with we found monk fruit in just a little container. And for that reason alone, cardiac reasons alone, just opt for the little monk fruit. I wish I brought it. I don't have it, but it's about that big and it's a liquid. The one that I do have that she talks about is xylitol. Xylitol is also a sugar alcohol. Again, she's going to lump this in the category of methadone. But here's where I'm also going to take disagreement. I've studied xylitol when it comes to oral health and cavities. And so let's say the reason I have this xylitol is because I'm hoping to put it in my coffee and break that addiction of sugar in my coffee, but still have my sweet coffee in the morning. And maybe I'll step down. Maybe, like she says, I will use it. And eventually, in 5 years, I'll be drinking black coffee or something. I don't know. But let's not get too crazy. But here's the reason why it's different for me, because I'm focused on oral health. And I have done the research to know that cavity causing bacteria does not respond, does not eat xylitol the same way it does other sugar. So if I can chew gum after my meals and stop cavity causing bacteria in its track, and I can maybe make some substitutes in my morning to help my oral health and to help my teeth, why wouldn't I do that? I wouldn't lump xylitol into the same category as all the others because there's a purpose for it. So that's my thoughts on xylitol. Of course, don't get crazy with it, but if you have a purpose and you're using it appropriately, that's what I would say. Last thing she says is, again, all these artificial sweeteners, again, because the brain, remember, we were going to come at this from a psychological standpoint. We said that in the beginning. Because the brain reacts the same with the dopamine between high fructose corn syrup, sugar, xylitol, monk fruit, honey, all of these, she's going to say all of these are adding to your sugar addiction, adding to why you crave it, adding to why you can't lose the weight, adding to all of these things. It makes no difference if it's 0 calories or caloric, okay? So that's basically a summary of chapter 2. Please let me know in the comments how you feel about all these topics, but very interested in knowing how you feel about high fructose corn syrup. Do you want to eliminate it? Can you eliminate it? What's the plan?